Hi there, it's David O here in overcast Ontario as we approach the end of July. Traffic is busy, airplanes overhead, a lot of things going on. But what is this time? It's a time of dramatic transition from the remembrance, from the sadness of the 3 weeks, culminating in the remembrance of the tragedies of Tisha B'Av, the destructions of the temples, and so much more. And yet, tomorrow, Friday, is described as one of the 2 happiest days in the Jewish calendar, along with Yom Kippur is the other one. Tu B'Av is well known for 7 joyous things that happened. What were they? I have a list here. Here's my list, right, for you? Okay. So, I'm going to save the best for last, in my opinion. But Tu B'Av is the middle of the month. It is the summer moon, the summer full moon. And it signaled a tremendous relief, sigh of relief, of joy in the Midbar. The Jews, after committing the sin of the spies, of doubting the will of Hashem and doubting that the gift of the land would be for them, were turned back into the desert to wander for 40 years, when they were only really days away from entering the land. And the tragedy was so great, the gossip, the scandal, the lashon hara of the report of the spies was so powerful and so effective that the Jews cried all night when they should have been thanking God for the gift of the land of Israel. And as a consequence, they wandered, as I said, for 40 more years. And each of those 40 years, 15,000 Jews of fighting age at the time of the spies would die. And they understood what this was. And so each man who was of fighting age, of military age, the night before Tisha B'Av would dig a grave for himself and lie down and sleep in this grave. And in the morning, 15,000 of them would not rise from the grave. Well, on the final Tisha B'Av, everybody rose from the grave. And already 600,000 had perished over 40 years times 15,000. And when they rose from the grave, they couldn't believe it. And they thought to themselves, we must have the calendar wrong. That night they went back in. The 10th of Av, and the 11th of Av, and the 12th of Av, until finally they looked up, right? And what did they see? They saw the full moon, the summer moon of Av, Menachem Av, the Av of consolation. And when they saw the full moon, it was clear that the curse of the spies and the deaths that had occurred every Tisha B'Av for the last 40 years was now over. And so it was reason for great celebration. And they were ready now to enter the land and conquer the land. That's number 1. Number 2, this time of year is when the wood that was collected for the temple, for sacrifices, etc., that they had collected all the wood they would need for the following year. The wood was dry, it was worm-free, and it was stacked and ready to function for the whole year. They would break the axes that had been used to collect and split the wood and have a big celebration. 3, this recalls another tragedy connected to the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jewish sovereignty. Was in 148 of the Common Era. The thousands of Jews that had been slaughtered by the Romans in Beitar 15 years earlier were finally allowed to be buried. It said the streets literally were rivers of blood when the Romans were done, and that the bodies were stacked high like walls, and the Romans would not permit the Jews to bury their dead until Tu B'Av, 15 years later. So it was a comfort to bury them. I can't say it was joyous. In 579 BC, the barriers between the northern kingdom and southern kingdoms were removed so that all Jews could come and pray in the temple. Previously, they had been prevented from it. In roughly 1200, before the Common Era, the tribe of Benjamin, who had been shunned because of a gross violation of civility, which I'd rather not discuss right now, was finally forgiven of the tribe, and the tribe was welcomed back into the community. In 1266 BCE, the tribes were permitted to intermarry. Previous to that, the tribes would marry within their own tribes. This was an issue because if you married out of a tribe and into another tribe, what would happen to the land that belonged to that tribe? Would it go with you, or would it stay with the original tribe and you would lose the land? So that was dealt with at this time. And number 7 was that the last of the Jews of the Exodus had died and was buried. Now, there is one other extremely joyous thing, is that there was a tradition, beautiful tradition. Try to imagine this cinematically, if you could, that the unmarried girls, Jewish girls, on Tu B'Av would dress in white dresses. They would share each other's dresses so that you didn't know who was wealthy and who was impoverished. And they would go and they would dance in the vineyards of Israel. By the way, Karmiel means vineyard of God. But this was especially true in Shiloh, where the Mishkan, where the temporary temple stood for a very long time in Israel before the temple of David and Solomon was built. And they would dance on Tu B'Av for their own pleasure, and the truth is that unmarried men would see them, and sometimes it would be cause for a couple to become married. It was a very wonderful and very joyous experience, and they were told that specifically that wealthy families would share their gowns with poor families and vice versa, and the goal was that the husbands would be choosing wives not by their wealth but by their piety, by their righteousness. It was the thing. Now that's actually number 7. Number 8 is not in this list, and I'm going to come back to it right at the end, okay? There's one more thing that is part of this weekend. It's Shabbos Nachamu Nachamu. Comfort, comfort, says God to his people after suffering through the commemoration of the destruction of the temple in Tisha B'Av. God says, be comforted, my people. And it is the first of 7 haftorahs, 7 readings to the prophets that are haftorahs of comfort and haftorahs of messianic prophecies. And clearly they apply to us very much today. We see how close we are to the fulfillment of many of the messianic prophecies. They should come about very soon. Finally, on a personal note, I'm here in Thornhill, which is where I became a rabbi. and I became a rabbi on Tu B'Av. For this, I send out a personal thank you to Harav David Shochet and to the community of Thornhill. So wishing you all Shabbos Nachamu Nachamu. You should all be comforted. You should all feel the joy. You should feel the presence of Mashiach that is among us already. And I will come back to you a week hence from now, and look forward to seeing you then. Shabbos Nachamu, Tu B'Av, with great warmth and caring for all of you. Take care. Shabbat Shalom.